50 frases com a expressão você não pode, você não deve, você está proibido em inglês. Utilizamos a palavra you mustn't. Dicas para memorizar essa forma, essa frase de falar. Atenção! Mustn't não significa deveria. Ele significa pode. Não pode, não pode, é proibido, não é permitido. You mustn't smoke here. You mustn't smoke here. You mustn't be late. You mustn't be late. Dica: must, deve. Tem que, você é obrigado. Mustn't, não pode, é proibido, você não é permitido. Dicas, frases. You mustn't smoke here. You mustn't smoke here. You mustn't drive without a license. You mustn't drive without a license. You mustn't use your phone during the exam. You mustn't use your phone during the exam. You mustn't park here. You mustn't park here. You mustn't enter this room. You mustn't enter this room. You mustn't play with fire. You mustn't play with fire. You mustn't touch these wires. You mustn't touch these wires. You mustn't cross the street here. You mustn't cross the street here. You mustn't drink this water. You mustn't drink this water. You mustn't drink and drive. You mustn't drink and drive. You mustn't ride your bike here. You mustn't ride your bike here. The student mustn't cheat on exams. Student mustn't cheat on exams. You mustn't lie to your parents. You mustn't lie to your parents. You mustn't copy people's work. You mustn't copy other people's work. You mustn't leave the door open. You mustn't leave the door open. You mustn't make so much noise. You mustn't make so much noise. Visitor mustn't take pictures here. Visitors mustn't take pictures here. Dogs mustn't enter this area. Dogs mustn't enter this area. You mustn't waste food. You mustn't waste food. You mustn't waste water. You mustn't waste water. You mustn't waste electricity. You mustn't waste electricity. Children mustn't play in the street. Children mustn't play in the street. You mustn't break the rules. You mustn't break the rules. Passengers mustn't smoke on the plane. Passengers mustn't smoke on the plane. You mustn't visit patients after visiting hours. You mustn't visit patients after visiting hours. You mustn't write in this book. You mustn't write in this book. You mustn't ignore traffic signs. You mustn't ignore traffic signs. You mustn't swim here. You mustn't swim here. You mustn't throw trash on the ground. You mustn't throw trash on the ground. You mustn't damage the trees. You mustn't damage the trees. You mustn't run in the hallway. You mustn't run in the hallway. Employees mustn't use the disinterest. Employees mustn't use the disinterest. You mustn't lose this key. You mustn't lose these keys. You mustn't share your password. You mustn't share your password. You mustn't sign this document yet. You mustn't sign this document yet. You mustn't open this box. You mustn't open this box. You mustn't touch these chemicals. You mustn't touch these chemicals. Visitors mustn't enter the operating room. A visitor mustn't enter the operating room. You mustn't shout in the library. You mustn't shout in the library. You mustn't eat in the classroom. You mustn't eat in the classroom. You mustn't ignore safe rules. You mustn't ignore safe rules. You mustn't feed the animals. You mustn't feed the animals. You mustn't record this movie. You mustn't record this movie. Employees mustn't be late. Employees mustn't be late. You mustn't steal. You mustn't steal. You mustn't leave the gate unlocked. Unlocked. You mustn't leave the gate unlocked. Students mustn't talk during the test. Students mustn't talk during the test. You mustn't listen to music during the exams. You mustn't listen to music during the exam. You mustn't ignore emergency instructions. You mustn't ignore the emergency instructions. You mustn't touch the machine. You mustn't touch the machine. Explicação da regra. Mustn't mais o verbo na forma básica. You mustn't smoke here. She mustn't enter the room. We mustn't touch that. Correto, you mustn't. She mustn't, they mustn't. Incorreto, you mustn't, she mustn't, they mustn't, quando você coloca esse S no final. Ou entering, ok? Shouldn't é um conselho negativo. Você não deveria. You shouldn't eat too much sugar. Mustn't é uma extrema proibição. You mustn't smoke here. Então, resumo, must, quando é uma obrigação forte. Mustn't, não pode, também não pode, é uma ordem, uma obrigação forte. Have to, uma obrigação por efeito de uma regra. Should, deveria, conselho. Shouldn't, também é um conselho. Ok? Está aqui a regra. Deus abençoe. Se você gostou do vídeo, deixe o seu like, por favor. Se inscreva no canal, ative o sininho das notificações, entre no grupo do WhatsApp. Maratone nossos vídeos, nossa playlist. E se você procurar algo mais profundo, mais acadêmico, vá lá no perfil, na bio do canal, procure o link da Hotmart e se inscreva no nosso curso da Hotmart. Bye, God bless you, see you next class.